The officer pushed her face first against the hood of his cruiser at 7:22 on a Tuesday morning in front of 47 people on Meridian Avenue in Silver Spring, Maryland. She did not resist. She did not scream. She kept both hands where he told her to keep them, flat on the warm metal, and she stared at the license plate of the car in front of her, Maryland tags, EK72294. The way a person stares at something when they are concentrating very hard on staying completely still. The crowd had gathered the way crowds always gather in Silver Spring in the morning. A bus driver who had stopped his route to watch. A woman with a stroller who had pressed herself against the pharmacy window. 3 men outside the West Indian bakery with coffee cups raised halfway to their mouths. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. 2 officers stood with their backs to the crowd, while a third one pressed his knee against the back of her legs and told her she had the right to remain silent. The only thing she said was, "My identification is in my left breast pocket." The officer reached in and pulled it out. He looked at it. Then he looked at it again. And then the other 2 officers turned around. She did not know who was watching from the windows of the federal building across the street, but the person watching from those windows knew exactly who she was. And he was already on his phone. Her name was Dr. Adaize Okoro Mensah, and she was 41 years old, 5'4", 131 pounds, though she had been 142 pounds for most of the 12 years prior. The 11 pounds had come off in the last 8 months, since the divorce. Not from grief, she would have said, but from the way her schedule had shifted. She was eating at her desk now instead of across a table from someone. Desk food was different. You forgot to finish it. She was wearing the gray blazer she had bought from the Nordstrom rack on Rockville Pike for $34 in February, the one she wore on Tuesdays because the building had aggressive air conditioning and she had learned to compensate. Under it was a white button-down she had pressed herself that morning at 5:40 a.m., before the sun came up, while a CNN segment played on the television in the next room that she was not fully watching. Her shoes were black, flat-heeled, from a DSW sale 2 years ago. She had polished them the night before. She always polished them the night before, the way her mother had taught her in Enugu. "You present yourself the way you wish to be received," her mother had said, "and you cannot control how you are received, but you can control your presentation." In her bag, which was now on the sidewalk 17 feet away where the first officer had dropped it, was a black canvas tote with a fraying strap she had been meaning to replace since October. Inside, her laptop, her badge lanyard, a folder of contractor briefing documents stamped confidential in red at the top and bottom of every page, a tin of eucalyptus lozenges, a small photograph of her daughter Chidera at age 7 making a face at the camera outside the National Museum of African Art on Jefferson Drive. Chidera was 9 now. The photo was old, but Adaize had never replaced it because she liked the particular quality of that face, the way her daughter could make her feel like the entire bureaucratic weight of the federal government was, in fact, somewhat ridiculous if you thought about it correctly. She had been walking from the Silver Spring metro station, the same route she had walked every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 years and 4 months, the 0.6 miles from the station platform to the shuttle pickup point at Meridian and Colesville, where the interagency van collected cleared personnel at 7:25 a.m. She had been on that route for exactly 11 minutes when the cruiser pulled to the curb. The morning was a gray October morning, the kind where the sky looked like the underside of a wet wool blanket and the air smelled of exhaust, and the particular leaf and concrete smell of a mid-Atlantic city in the 3rd week of fall. The temperature was 44 degrees. Adaize had checked it on her phone before she left the apartment, not because she was unprepared, but because she had a habit of knowing things precisely. She had the collar of the gray blazer up. Her left hand was in her coat pocket, and her right hand held her phone, where she had been reading a briefing summary on a secure app, the same way she read it every Tuesday morning on the metro platform while the train came in from Forest Glen. The officer who got out first was young. She registered that immediately, the way she registered most things about a room within the first 4 seconds, a habit built from 11 years of intelligence work. Young, thick through the shoulders, with the particular set of jaw that she had learned to associate not with cruelty exactly, but with a very specific kind of certainty about how things were and what role everyone present was playing. He had looked at her the way the officer at a traffic stop looks at a car that matches a description, which it turned out was precisely what had happened. A woman had called in a report of a suspicious person on Meridian Avenue, black female, medium height, dark clothing, acting erratically. Adize Okoro Mensah, walking at her normal pace with her canvas tote over one shoulder and her phone in her hand, had matched the description in the way that women who looked like her often matched descriptions in neighborhoods where people who looked like her were not expected to be at 7:22 in the morning. The skill she had never put on her civilian Ursum was the one that had kept her employed in the same directorate for 11 years. She could read a room. Any room. A boardroom. A field debrief. A hostile meeting at a foreign ministry. And know within seconds where the power was, who held it, who was pretending to hold it, and what it would take to shift it. She had done this in 4 countries. She had done this at a table in Nairobi in 2019 when 2 men across from her were lying about something she couldn't yet name, and she had to decide, in real time, whether to press or to wait. She had waited. The truth had surfaced in 11 days. She had been right. She was doing it now, with her hands flat on the hood of the cruiser, with the officer's knee against the back of her legs. She was reading the room. She was also, quietly, noting the badge number on the officer's shoulder. 3847. She noted it the way she noted the Maryland license plate, not with drama, not with the performance of noticing, but with the calm of a person for whom information is simply what the world is made of. If this story is already settling somewhere in your chest, stay with it. What happens in the next 4 minutes changes everything about what you think you've been watching. The crowd on the sidewalk had grown. A teenager was filming on his phone. The bus driver had not moved his bus. The woman with the stroller had started crying quietly, not for any reason she could have fully explained, except that she had seen this before, and the sight of a woman this composed in the middle of something this wrong produced in her a kind of grief she had no name for. What nobody on that sidewalk knew, what Officer 3847 did not know, what the officer pressing documents out of her bag did not know, what the woman who had made the phone call from inside her apartment on the 4th floor did not know, was that the folder inside the canvas tote was a briefing document prepared for a meeting that was scheduled to begin at 8 a.m. in a room inside the Pentagon that required a specific category of clearance to enter. A meeting that the deputy director of a particular directorate had personally asked Adize to attend because she had spent the previous 6 weeks working on the analysis that would form the foundation of the briefing. The deputy director's name was on the document. The secretary's name was also on the document. The officer with her identification read it a 3rd time. He lowered it. He said, with the particular flatness of a person who has begun to understand that they have made a serious error and has not yet decided what to do with that understanding, "Can you explain what this is?" It was not a question. It landed like one because of the way his voice went up at the end, but it was not a question. It was a man asking a woman to give him a way out of what he had just done. She had been standing with her face against the hood for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. The cuffs were still on her wrists. She said, "It's my identification from the Department of Defense. The number at the bottom is a verification line. You can call it." The woman who first saw what happened from the federal building was not the deputy director. She was a woman named Willa Mae Teta, 63 years old, who ran the security desk in the lobby of the building across Meridian Avenue, and had been doing so for 9 years. Willa Mae had grown up in Kumasi and had come to Silver Spring in 1993 with her first husband, and had stayed after he left because she had built, by that point, a life in the space he vacated, A church, a block association, a desk job she understood completely, a neighborhood she knew in the bone. She smelled faintly of lavender and something like the warm plastic of a desk lamp that had been on for several hours, and she wore, every single day, a small enamel pin on her left lapel that had been given to her by her daughter at her high school graduation 16 years ago. The pin said nothing legible. It was purely decorative, a small blue circle. But Willa May touched it once every morning when she sat down, the way some people touch a cross or a photograph. Ritual, not ceremony. She had the particular quality of absolute stillness that comes to people who have spent decades watching other people walk in and out of buildings. She could read a sidewalk the way other people read a newspaper. She had been watching Adaize Okoro Mensah walk past her building every Tuesday and Thursday for the better part of 3 years, had noted the gray blazer, the canvas tote, the polished shoes, the particular angle at which this woman carried herself. Not arrogance, Willa May had always thought, but the posture of someone who has earned the right to be somewhere and has simply never felt the need to announce it. She had watched the cruiser pull up. She had watched the 3 officers get out. She had watched the first officer put his hand on the woman's arm and direct her to the hood of the car with the specific economy of motion that told Willa May everything she needed to know about what kind of stop this was. She picked up her desk phone and called a number she had dialed 4 times in 9 years, each time for a situation that required it. The number belonged to a man named Tobena Owusu Boateng, who worked on the 4th floor of that building, whose title was long and whose actual function was the kind that did not appear on organizational charts, and who had worked alongside Adaize Okoro Mensah for 6 of his 11 years in the directorate. Tobena picked up on the second ring. Willa May said, "Come downstairs. Right now. Bring your credentials." She did not explain further. She did not need to. 9 years at a security desk had taught her the value of precise communication. The cuffs had been on Adaize's wrists for 7 minutes and 40 seconds when Tobena Owusu Boateng walked out of the building across the street. He was 54 years old. He was wearing a suit that had been made for him by a tailor in Lagos in 2017 and still fit him exactly as it had been intended to fit, which was to say it looked like the suit and the man had been manufactured together. He was not tall, 5'9", and he was not large, but he had the quality of presence that some people carry, the quality that made a room reorganize itself slightly when he walked in, not because of anything he said or did, but because of the particular way he occupied space, as though he had been in that space for longer than he had actually been there. He walked across Meridian Avenue at a pace that was not hurried. He reached the sidewalk and stopped 3 feet from the first officer and looked at him with the expression of a man who has been interrupted while doing something important and would like to return to it shortly. He said, "I need you to remove those restraints." He did not raise his voice. He did not present identification first. He simply said what was going to happen, in the tense that indicated it was already decided. The officer with badge number 3847 said, "Sir, this is inactive," Tobena said. "I understand what it is. Remove the restraints." He held out his credentials then, not as a request but as a closing of the subject, the way you set down the last piece of evidence in a case that is already decided. The officer looked at the credentials. He looked at Tobena. He looked at the credentials again. The second officer, the one who had been going through the canvas tote, set the folder down very carefully on top of the bag. He straightened up. He put his hands at his sides. It took Officer 3847 9 more seconds to reach for the key on his belt. Adaize counted them. She had nothing else to do with those 9 seconds except count them and file them. The crowd on the sidewalk had not dispersed. The teenager's phone was still recording. The bus driver had still not moved his bus, though by now 3 cars behind it had given up and gone around. The cuffs came off at 7:31 a.m. Adaize brought her hands forward and held them in front of her for a moment. Palms up, then turned them over. Palms down, the way you check whether something is still working. She picked up her canvas tote from the sidewalk. She checked the folder. The pages were in order. Nothing had been damaged. She put the folder back inside the tote and placed the tote over her shoulder. She looked at the officer with badge number 3847 with an expression that was not anger, not contempt, not the performed dignity of someone making a point. It was simply the expression of a person who has seen this room before and has already decided what she will do about it and does not require the other people in the room to understand that yet. She said, "I'm going to be late for a meeting." Tabena said. The van waited. They walked toward the shuttle pickup at Meridian and Colesville together, and behind them the crowd began to move again. And the bus driver finally closed his doors and pulled back into traffic, and the woman with the stroller stood for a moment longer on the sidewalk before she walked away, still without being able to explain why she was still crying. The shuttle arrived at the Pentagon's river entrance at 8:07 a.m. The meeting had been held for 7 minutes. When Adeze walked in and placed her folder on the conference table, the deputy director, a woman named Constance Adeyemi Bright, who had been the first black woman to hold that title in the history of the directorate, and who did not use her own history as a political instrument, but as a calibration device, looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then she said, "Start from when you're ready." Adeze started. She spoke for 41 minutes without notes, drawing on 6 weeks of analysis and 11 years of accumulated understanding of how certain patterns move through certain systems in certain regions. And when she finished, there was a silence of the kind that follows something precise and important. The kind of silence that is not emptiness, but the sound of people processing something that has reorganized their thinking. The secretary, who had not spoken since Adeze began, said, "This is the clearest brief we've had in 2 years." Constance Adeyemi Bright did not look at the secretary when she said it. She was looking at Adeze. What happened afterward was not dramatic in the way that television requires drama to be. There was no press conference. There was no public ceremony. The Department of Defense does not hold press conferences about its analysts, and Adeze had not asked for one. What happened was this: a formal complaint was filed with the Montgomery County Police Department the following morning, citing Officer 3847 and 2 additional officers, signed by the legal counsel of a federal agency whose letterhead most people in the Montgomery County Administrative Office had never seen before in their careers. The complaint specified the time of the incident down to the minute, the duration of the unlawful restraint, the nature of the individual restrained, and the context of the classified materials that had been removed from her bag without cause or authorization. The letter was 3 pages. The 3rd page listed, in clean, plain language, the legal consequences available to the department should the matter not be addressed institutionally rather than individually. By the following Thursday, the Montgomery County Police Department had issued a formal apology, opened an internal affairs investigation, and announced a mandatory retraining program for all patrol officers in the Silver Spring and Wheaton districts, the first time such a mandate had been issued department-wide in 11 years. Officer 3847 did not lose his job immediately. He was suspended pending the investigation's conclusion. Whether that conclusion would come down the way Adeze believed it should was not something she could control. She had learned, over 11 years of intelligence work, the difference between what you can control and what you cannot, and she had made her peace with the latter without making peace with its causes. Willa Mae Teta, who had initiated none of this publicly and had been mentioned in no official document, was sitting at her security desk at 7:21 the following Tuesday morning when Adeze walked past the federal building on her way to the shuttle pickup. Adeze stopped. She went inside. She set a brown paper bag on the corner of the security desk. Inside was a container of waki from the Ghanaian restaurant on Georgia Avenue, with shito and fried plantain packed separately so nothing went soft in transit, and a small card in an envelope that Willa Mae opened after Adeze had gone. The card said, "I know what you did. I counted every second. Thank you." Willa Mae placed the card in the top drawer of her desk, under her access log. She did not show it to anyone. She did not need to. She had been carrying this kind of thing for a long time, the knowledge of what it cost to see something clearly and act on it, and the specific private satisfaction that came when the acting turned out to have mattered. She had enough of that knowledge stored away that she did not need to share it to feel its weight. She opened the wakey container and ate it at her desk, and watched Meridian Avenue through the lobby window, and went on doing what she had always done, paying attention to who walked past a building and deciding what that meant. The world did not always know what it was standing in the presence of. That was the truth at the center of what happened on Meridian Avenue at 7:22 a.m. On a Tuesday morning, a woman walked down a sidewalk she had walked 312 times. She was seen as a problem before she was seen as a person, and the people who saw her as a problem were not, most of them, doing something they thought of as wrong. They were following a process. They were responding to a call. They were operating inside a system that had certain shapes built into it, and those shapes had nothing to do with who Adaeze Okoro-Mensah was, and everything to do with what she looked like. That is the older cruelty, and the harder one. Not the cruelty that knows itself, but the cruelty that has been formalized into procedure, wrapped in policy language, given a badge number. You can file a complaint against a person. Filing a complaint against a system requires something more patient and more precise. Adaeze filed both. What she could not file, and did not try to file, was the 7 minutes and 40 seconds. Those she kept. She put them with the other things she had kept from 11 years of work, the things that were not in any file, any briefing, any analysis, but that formed the actual substance of what she knew. Not data. Reckoning, the two are different, and she had always known the difference. There is a particular kind of power that is never given. It is only recognized, and usually late, and always by the wrong people first, which is the nature of how power tends to move in the world. It had been recognized late, in her case. The people who should have seen it first, who had every reason to see it, who were standing close enough to see it, had looked at the gray blazer and the canvas tote and the flat-heeled shoes and chosen not to look further. That was their loss. It was also their exposure. And in that particular order, their loss, then their exposure, was a lesson that most of them would not have been able to articulate, but that they would carry forward in some form, if they were honest with themselves, for the rest of their working lives. You cannot cuff what a person carries inside their mind. You can take the folder. You can take the badge. You can press someone's face against the hood of a car on a Tuesday morning in front of 47 people on Meridian Avenue in Silver Spring, Maryland, but you cannot take the 11 years. You cannot take the knowledge of how patterns move through systems. You cannot take the room reading, the Nairobi patience, the understanding of when to press and when to wait. You cannot take the card in Willa May Teti's top drawer under the access log. Some things are not detained. They continue. Adaeze Okoro-Mensah walked to the Silver Spring metro station on the following Thursday at 7:11 a.m. She wore the gray blazer. She carried the canvas tote with the fraying strap. She had still not replaced it. She had thought about it several times in the previous 2 weeks and had decided, without being fully able to say why, that she was not ready to replace it yet. That it still had something to carry. That the fraying was not a problem, but a record. She walked the 0.6 miles from the station platform to Meridian and Colesville in 11 minutes, in the particular posture her mother had taught her. Not arrogance, but the posture of someone who has earned the right to be somewhere and has simply never felt the need to announce it. The shuttle was on time. She got on. She went to work. Here is the question I want you to sit with. If you saw a woman being handcuffed on a sidewalk and you had the power to make one phone call that could change what happened, but making it would cost you something, would put your name on a record, would require you to be the person who stepped forward when everyone else looked away, would you make it? And if you would, what would it take to make sure you already had that number saved in your phone before the moment arrived? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.